Hello everybody, welcome to our webinar and opportunity for Q&A with Dr. Chris Nordstrom from the Medic Portal. Chris, if you want to unmute yourself and turn your webcam on so we can see you, that would be great, and we can get going.
Hi, I'm trying to, but I can't unfortunately turn a webcam on because it says the host has stopped it. So I believe you might have to.
Right, let's have a look at some of the settings and we will go from there. So, hopefully now, Chris, you should be able to say hello. There we are.
Can you hear me?
We can see you, we can hear you. Fantastic. Great. So thank you everyone for joining us, whether you're joining us on Zoom or live on Facebook. It's the first time I've done it through Facebook, so I hope that that is also working through as well. Before we delve into things and we have the opportunity to go into the discussion with Chris, for those of you who are new to the university, guys, just to briefly introduce me and ourselves. We are specialists in supporting students with international university applications. Contact details are there. I do this work as a member of International ACAC, IACA, CIS, COBIS, and actually HECO as well in the United States, and my contact details are there. And through my email, the WhatsApp, or indeed the social media, very happy to answer questions that any students or schools may have. Though in this particular topic, that you may find yourself referred very quickly on to the Medic Portal, who, as I'm sure you will learn over the next 40 minutes or so with Chris, really are the absolute experts in this field. We make it our strapline, our mission, to try and reduce stress as much as possible. And this bit down the bottom is really, really important for the topic of today's webinar, that applying to global universities has many different deadlines, requirements, and paperwork. Never is that more important than in the world of applying to UK medical schools, as I'm sure you will see. I will flag another set of events that we are doing coming up next week, a week of webinars on Irish universities, and again, particularly relevant for today's topic. We're also doing one looking at the health sciences in Ireland with Dublin City University and the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland as part of that week. So if you are interested in finding out about Ireland, particularly medicine in Ireland, please go to theuniversityguys.com/Irish week and you'll find information about which days each topic is happening and how to register for those as well. Okay, without further ado then, Chris, let's get started into this. We've got some information here that people can see and can look at the link as we go. But for those who don't know much about the Medic Portal, could you tell us a bit about you guys and in particular the kind of story behind the Medic Portal?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. So yes, the Medic Portal, we've been around now for quite a number of years, and we specialize in supporting people for their applications to medical school. I think, unlike others, what we aim to do really is provide a huge online information source, really demystifying the entire process from start to finish, and then supporting along all the hurdles along the way. Now, we're partnered with the Royal Society of Medicine, and really I would say the majority of what we do really is providing information. So for those people interested in medicine as a career, we've got large sections talking about how to go about exploring that, through various means, from blogs, videos, through to supporting with how to make the most out of your work experience. And then as you progress through the application, helping with all the various crunch points. So exams such as the UCAT or BMAT that you may sit, personal statements, interview preparation, and really providing that all-round support from start to finish. We work both with individuals, but also with a large number of schools. And in fact, we work with about 70% now of the top 100 schools in the UK, as well as a large range of academy chains and schools internationally, so across 4 continents as well.
That's it. And so as someone who used to be a head of college counselling at international school, we did ourselves make full use of the Medic Portal services. That was International School of Brussels. And I think that relationship, Chris, still continues, actually.
Indeed. And I remember meeting them many years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like a long time ago. Okay, well, let's delve straight into this kind of idea then. The focus for a lot of the people joining us today is going to be as international students applying to study medicine in the UK. When you are working with students in this process, or when you are speaking to your contacts in admissions offices at UK medical schools, what are the main mistakes that you come across that international students are making when potentially applying to UK medical schools?
Okay, I think the main things I would really point out is if you're an international student applying, remember you are applying in a slightly different way compared to if you are a home student, so UK or currently EU, although of course we will discuss that a bit later on. Now, the first thing I think is really important is make sure that you are fully informed. The process is quite complex and convoluted. There are many hurdles across the way. But as an international student, it's very important that you are always strategic in your choices. Now, I'd say one of the biggest mistakes I often see is people don't apply strategically. The reason I say it's important to be strategic is that the number of places available to international students is capped by the UK government. So universities cannot offer more than 7.5% of their places to international students. Now, what we see is that there are certain university names that are perhaps more familiar with internationally compared to others. And as a result, people flock towards a small select group of these universities. That means the competition ratio as an international student can be absolutely intense at those. And we see students who then apply to, let's say, Oxford, Cambridge, UCL, Imperial, some of these big named universities as international students. But each one of them is so overly competitive that what they do is effectively give themselves a tiny chance of being successful. It's really important instead to spread the risk a little bit. There might be one or two of these big named universities that you feel you really want to apply to, but actually think about the other applications. If you're applying through UCAF, you have 4 choices. Make sure that you're using those strategically to balance that application ratio a little bit across all of those universities as well. So make sure you do your research. Spend time, look into the different universities, try and find the ones that actually will suit you as opposed to the ones that you may have heard of, because there is not necessarily any real advantage to applying in that way. So do your research, be very strategic about how you're applying. I'd say that is the biggest mistake we see for the international students.
I guess then, just to take that a step further, and you and I have talked about this before, and indeed on the podcast that we did, there are some universities I think many families may look at and go, well, we don't want our child to go there. And potentially that might not be a university you would look at for history or engineering or business. Mm-hmm. But for medicine, as you said, it's a capped program. And the government, the British government, is distributing medical students around the United Kingdom to ensure there's access to placements, that they, all the elements they have to do. Physically training doctors and moving them out into hospitals and surgeries and things. You can't have everybody in the same place. You should ignore, I guess, what your own perception of the prestige or reputation of a university is. If the university has a medical school, that degree is going to be as worthwhile than it would be from a university you've heard of, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, the reality is every medical degree in the UK has to be approved by the GMC, the General Medical Council, and they set very high standards. And that's in part one of the reasons why you can't just go and open a medical school and charge for it, certainly not in the UK. So that means every single degree that you get for medicine out of the UK effectively is identical. It is GMC approved at the end of it, and you will get a GMC number and registration onto that. So that's a really important thing to remember. Once you've graduated from medical school, you actually don't write your university down anymore on any future application forms for jobs. What you do is you provide your GMC number. That is your proof that you have medical registration. So certainly, if you're going to practice in the UK, it makes absolutely no difference what university you attended in terms of your job prospects, career, or anything like that. I will caveat that there are a few exceptions to this rule. In particular, some countries, and I'd say Singapore being the notable exception here because it's one of the big feeders of international students to the UK, the Singaporean Medical Council does not recognise all UK medical schools for them. So if you are planning on doing medicine in the UK, but working abroad afterwards, it is worth checking with your country that your country's medical council recognises. However, having said that, the Singaporean Council, for example, recognises the vast majority. It's only some of the newest ones they haven't quite caught up with and processed. If you're going to work in countries such as the EU, well, again, it's fully applicable everywhere. And to be honest, many other countries where we see a lot of applicants like Hong Kong, well, it makes no difference where you apply because no UK degree is valid in Hong Kong anyway. Right. So it's a really small contingent of students where I'd say it actually really wouldn't matter where you go. For everyone else, the most important thing is getting in and getting through it successfully. So you need to apply strategically, so you get in, and then you have to try and go somewhere where that place, i.e. the course structure, the environment and everything else is suited to you, because it's a long degree, 5-6 years. You need to make sure you're having a good time. You get the most out of that degree. And then once you graduate, you have your GMC number, and it makes no difference to anyone where you actually train thereafter.
Got it. And I would say for those who may not be intimately familiar with the Medic Portal, Chris is a qualified doctor and still works in the National Health Service. So this is not just someone who's learnt this. He's been through that incredibly rigorous experience, as indeed of others who work at the Medic Portal. So it's really important to have that perspective. In then that idea of choosing the medical schools, you know, those of us here in the UK know, but it may not be as well known internationally, there's actually a massive variety of provision as to what your medical education will look like across the different medical schools. I wonder whether you could kind of discuss that a little bit, Chris, and so maybe guide people to know how you might be a better fit in the admissions process for this type of medical program rather than the others, and where maybe a scattergun approach without really understanding, potentially students could be applying for 4 very different types of education, and they're not going to be able to be a good fit in their application for those.
Absolutely. I'd say the first thing I would always advise looking at is the course structure. We teach medicine in different ways. Some places are more traditional, so a more science-heavy preclinical approach. And some places, which is actually the majority now, use an integrated approach. So it's still a bit of a preclinical-clinical divide, but instead of teaching pure sciences like blocks of anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, what we do is a system-based approach. So students will study, for example, the cardiovascular system, but then they will do all the relevant sciences to the cardiovascular system in one go. So the anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, embryology, so on and so forth, in one foul swoop. And then they move from system to system. Now, the advantage of that integrated approach is that it puts everything into a bit more of a context early, and many of these universities will also have some form of clinical learning at the same time. So sticking with the cardiovascular system as the example, you might also do half a day a week where you spend some time on the wards, learning how to do cardiac examination, maybe learning the basics of ECG interpretation, and it makes it a bit more medically focused. Now, the other extreme really from this then is the problem-based learning approach. Now, this is totally different. So instead of having a very lecture-heavy based approach that you have in integrated and traditional courses, problem-based learning is very much a group learning environment. You are in smaller groups, anything from about 10 to 20 students, along with a facilitator, and you get a range of different problems, cases, and as a group, you need to identify your own learning objectives, and each individual then goes off and researches different components of that problem and case. You get back together, you discuss it as a group, you teach each other what you've learned, and the idea is that you're learning medicine not just through a lecture-based systematic approach, but actually you're learning it through these cases where you're then learning what's relevant to that specific case. And by going through a whole number of different cases, by the end of it, you'll have a good understanding of medicine as a whole. Now, clearly there are pros and cons of each system, and I'd say the biggest one to think about is what kind of person you are and your learning style. If you're a bit more introvert, if you like the idea of going to lectures and cramming ahead of an exam in the library, then you're going to do really well at traditional and integrated courses. But if you're this outgoing person who loves group work and you like working really as part of a team, then problem-based learning courses might be more suited for you. But a big mistake people make is not really looking at the way the medicine is taught at that university. So you might have someone who is a bit more introvert and likes the lecture-based setup, but if you go to a problem-based learning course, they might really struggle. It's the wrong type of learning environment for them. So for me, the course structure is one of the most important factors you have to look at. Of course, you need to look at the university as a whole. For example, do they offer an intercalated BSc? Not all medical programs offer this opportunity to do one extra year at the university and also gain a Bachelor of Sciences in an allied subject. What's the feedback like from current students? Is it good? Is it not good? Where are the rotations? For example, if you're going to be in London, well, you might have a very small area of London where you're studying, whereas if you're going to other universities that are a bit more rural, you might be placed over much larger geographical areas. And speaking of geography, is the location one where you can see yourself living 5-6 years? For international students, this is hugely important, because if you're going to be in a city that has no flight connections anywhere near where you're originally from, well, that makes going back home very difficult. So that is another factor you might want to look at. Of course, there are some other smaller factors, for example, dissection versus prosection. It's a slightly macabre way of looking at it, but some universities still teach anatomy through whole body dissection. Fantastic learning opportunity, but not one that many still do because of the difficulty in actually providing this. And many others now teach through prosection instead. So small factors like this are also going to be really important. You need to really make your mind up looking, I'd say, course structure, the biggest one, and then all these other factors. And then at the end of it, you have to play the strategic hand, because by the time it comes to applying, you will have your UCAT score at the very least, possibly BMAT score, and you can be a bit strategic and say, right, this is the short list of the universities I really like the look of. Now, this is where I have the best chances of getting in. You marry these two concepts together, and then hopefully you've got a good shortlisted selection of where not only you think you really want to go, but also where you've got a good chance of getting in.
Right. I mean, you've kind of preempted my next question, Chris, which is fantastic, which is that idea of looking at those final selection criteria. Yeah, every counsellor and students looking through this process will be very used to looking at a UK university website, and for a course like business or history or French, you click on entry requirements and there's a nice little thing of grades. But for medicine, there's a huge amount of text that opens up, and possibly a link to another website where you start to get about how we use the UCAT score, or BMAT if it's a BMAT university. Do we score the personal statement? What kind of interviews do we do? All these kind of things. And I guess maybe we chuck into this idea of mistakes many people make is to assume every UK university is selecting students in the same way. There is massive variety of methods that universities are using. I would go as far as to say every university is almost quite different from each other in the nuance of what they're looking at. Yes?
Absolutely. What I would say is I personally look at this as a game of two halves. The first part is always getting shortlisted, and then the second part is converting your shortlisting to an offer. Now, the shortlisting process is actually a really convoluted one, because it's this step where universities, broadly speaking, have three different parameters they can use to decide who they want to bring in the shortlisting stage to the interview. Now, these three parameters, you've got academics, you have performances, now typically GCSEs or predicted A levels, but of course, if you're international, depending which country you're in, similar or equivalent exams. That's one parameter. You've got the personal statement, which some, as you say, don't look at all. Others can weigh quite heavily, and a few somewhere in between. And then you've got the third parameter, which is your aptitude test. So either the UCAT or the BMAT exam. Now, each university will combine these three different elements with different weightings internally. So you might have some that place a huge emphasis on the UCAT with no emphasis on the personal statement and a minimal emphasis on academics. Or you might have some that put a fairly equal weighting across all three different selection criteria. And this is where it's so important to do your research, because you need to see where, based on what you've done to date, you stand the best chance of meeting that shortlisting criteria. Now, of course, in an ideal world, let's say you've got straight A stars at GCSE and your predicted A stars at A level, and you've got the highest UCAT score in the country, and you've got an amazing personal statement. Well, great. Then, of course, in that case, you're probably safe everywhere. But the reality is almost everyone is not in that boat. Some people will have dropped the ball a little bit somewhere, whether it was on their UCAT, or perhaps they don't really have as many good things to write about as they thought when it came to doing their personal statement. So using some research time, going through websites, we try and write guides on this in particular about how places shortlist, and then finding out where have I got the best chance. Now then the second half, of course, is your interview. And at this stage, effectively all resets. So once you get to the interview stage, well, then it's all about converting that interview to an offer, and it comes down to your performance on the day of that interview, because everything else you've done typically is forgotten now. You've met all the requirements to be shortlisted. Now you just go into the interview and make sure that you are what they think you are at this stage to convert to an offer.
Great, and all the kind of nuance of those kind of things, and there's a wonderful tool I know on your website. You have it there on your website, people can find it, and the particular tool, which I myself will dabble with from time to time, you can put in the name of 4 different medical schools, the grid populates, and you can find out a lot of this kind of information there. So I will definitely plug that. You can everyone see the link on the screen now.
Absolutely. The comparison tool, yeah, really useful to, once you start thinking about different units you want, to then really find the core information, how they score, how they weight these different components.
Great. And also just to flag in the ideas, so there are some universities which will also have cut-offs for UCAT scoring in particular. If a student doesn't meet the cut-off, they really shouldn't be applying there.
Absolutely. I mean, if you do not meet one of the parameters on anything, then there is no point applying, because usually it's a fairly automated process. If you didn't make this minimum cutoff, your application will not be advanced. It's a battle we often have with parents. They say, well, it's so close, I'm sure they will consider. Well, unfortunately, no. If there is a cutoff where they say you need X UCAT points to be shortlisted as a minimum, if you don't have that, you will not be advanced. Same goes to the GCSEs. If they say you need to have GCSEs in the following subject at the following grades, if you don't meet that, your application will not be advanced. So be careful. Do not apply somewhere where you don't meet all of the basic criteria. But of course, saying just because you meet the basic criteria does not mean you will be shortlisted. And there are many courses where, if you look at Oxbridge, for example, the GCSE requirement is actually very low. But if you then look at the data of who gets in, well, virtually no one without straight A stars gets shortlisted. So whilst you might only need Bs or equivalent or sixes now in, say, English, maths and the sciences, no one really gets in ultimately, or gets an offer rather, who didn't have A stars or 8s and 9s. So be careful with that and look at historical data as well.
And then sometimes an issue, and you and I have spoken about this before, there are some universities which insist on GCSEs, and as an international student, you may go, well, my school didn't offer GCSEs, I'd be fine. Unfortunately, some medical schools will say, no, sorry, even if GCSEs are not offered in your country, let alone your school, we still need you to have them. And people need to be careful of that as well.
Exactly, and it's best to contact, if your situation is very unique, contact the university directly in advance of applying, just to clarify their stance. And what you'll find is some universities that get a large number of applicants, and I have to say, I think probably the best one that I've seen is UCL. They have a fantastic international applicants page where you can filter every single country and it will tell you exactly what you require if you're based from that country. But that's because there's such a international university, they've put in the resources to creating this. Some of the smaller medical schools, which don't have such a large number, well, they don't quite have this on their website, so you might need to contact them directly. But usually what you'll see is, even in their cases, certain countries where they tend to get a lot of applicants from, they will still list the requirements of what they're looking for on their website.
Understood. Okay, so move away from the kind of the elements of the strategy and stuff there, and more of the things that are kind of changing for upcoming cycles. You mentioned the 7.5% figure, so the number of international students has been capped at a proportion of the domestic number. Now, what counts as international is obviously now changing for the next cycle, was up until the group of students who will be starting medical school soon, an EU student counted as a domestic student. Now, because of Brexit, an EU student is going to count as an international student. How do you think that might impact things, Chris, and what guidance might you be able to give?
Yeah, so let's look at some data here. For 2020 entry, we had just under 24,000 successful applicants for medicine. Now, out of those, 18,500 were UK applicants. We then had 1,700 EU applicants and about 3,500 international applicants. So what you can see is, rather ironically, the EU actually made up about 7.5% out of the total UK-EU, i.e. home student for fees status applicants. What's going to happen this year for 2021 entry is a bit more convoluted. So if your course starts after August 2021, then you're going to come in under the new regulations. Now, all the medical schools, of course, start after August each year. So that means the 2021 cohort will sadly fall foul of the new regulations, which means that if you are applying from the EU, you are no longer deemed a home student, you are an international student. So in essence, what we've done is, when you look at the home students from this year, which together made up about 20,000 out of the 24,000 applicants, roughly, well, we've just removed 1,700 of them, the EU ones, and now we've reclassified them as international. This has a few profound impacts. One, of course, is fees. The fees for international students are significantly higher than for home students. The second impact is student loans. as a international student, and going forward for EU students after, well, next cycle, say from entry for next year, 2021, will not be eligible for student loans. Of course, there might be some scholarships and so on available, and some of the EU countries themselves may sponsor students to do it, but they won't be able to access the UK student loan system. It also means that the cap of 7.5% currently still seems to be there. Now, that means we've increased the competition. International students, there were 3,500 competing for those 7.5% of places. Well, next year, assuming every EU student applied, well, we've increased that by 50%. But of course, in reality, we haven't, because I don't think we're going to see everyone who usually applies from the EU applying, because costs alone are going to be very prohibitive here.
But the assumption I get, and for potentially maybe for counsellors advising units on this, you may have a situation where we had a student with this kind of academic profile applying as an international applicant, and a similar student in the upcoming cycle, we would expect a similar outcome. Yeah, the game has got a little bit more competitive for an international student, because some EU students will still choose to apply, and they're moving from one pool to the other.
Absolutely, and I don't see necessarily any decrease coming from non-current EU countries anyway, because for them, nothing's changing. So Hong Kong, Singapore, the two biggest feeders back to the UK, well, there's been no real change here. So I don't see why that number would drop significantly to what it did this year. But as you say, it may very well increase, because in addition, now we have the EU side who will still want to apply.
Got it. And then the second more kind of current thing, and something that's happened even in the time between you and I planning this and the event happening, is that with A-level chaos in the UK with grades and things being awarded, more students got the grades to get into medical school than the medical schools were planning for. And medicine, as we've discussed, is very significant capacity constraints. The government has relaxed the cap slightly, but I'm sure you yourselves, dealing with a vast number of places, have some intelligence. There will be a number of students who've been told you can now come to medical school, but it's going to have to be in 2021. What impact is that likely to have for people who are automatically in the 2021 applicant pool?
Yeah, I wish that my crystal ball was working a bit more efficiently than it currently is on this one. Sadly, this is something that I predicted quite a long time ago on a few webinars that we were talking about. I sort of envisaged this total chaos coming. Whereby what would happen is we're going to over-offer massively compared to what we'd anticipated. Teacher grades were always going to be overestimated compared to otherwise. We know this in predicted grades. I mean, more than 50% of predicted grades are normally wrong anyway, and they tend to be wrong, over-predicted as opposed to under-predicted. So this was somewhat foreseeable, I think. Now, just to take a quick step back, the UK government do cap medical school places. So in addition to it being difficult to run a course, because you need not just elective theatre, but remember, you need hospitals, attachments, general practices, all sorts of other infrastructure around it, which you can't just magically generate from nowhere. But the other reason it's capped is because it's funded. Now, as it stands, although, of course, as a student, you don't like the idea of the 9,000 plus fees that you pay each year, the university gets funding from the government because it costs more than the student pays. So unlike other courses where it's profitable to have more students because it costs less to deliver the course, medicine costs more. So universities are dependent on government subsidizing those places and providing this buffer zone financing on top of what the student themselves are providing. So that's one of the caps which they've agreed to release, which means that more places will become available. But even so, we're then still constrained by the fact that they need a good education, which means access to hospitals, patients, general practices, and so on. And that's pushing people into deferring into 2021. The universities have offered financial incentives for some people to actually shift their place 1 year. I think the net result of this is we're going to see a very competitive application cycle in 2021. Realistically, we're going to have more students applying because we've got the spillover of this year carrying forward with the normal number of applicants that we would expect to see in any given year. Then we can also throw in the people who thought, I'm not going to apply this year because of COVID. And I don't think I'm going to have a good university experience with a lot more online learning, social distancing, and all of these things that come with the virus. And they thought, well, I'll just wait till next year. Maybe I'll have a better university experience. So I think we've got a bit of a triple whammy effect here for 2021 entry, where it is going to be incredibly competitive.
Right. That is well, I expect you to say, but probably not the news that many people listening wanted to hear. But it's good to have that honesty. Beyond the kind of things that we've talked about then, and if we've got students, families, counsellors joining us today with students who are preparing applications, are there any other top tips you'd want to pass on for people that they should be considering?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's going to be very competitive. So you need to really put in the effort if you want to stand a good chance of securing an offer. Now, when we looked earlier at what universities can use to select applicants, the one thing you really can have a huge impact on yourself, it's your aptitude test score. Coming in with a phenomenally high UCAT or BMAT score really will make a big difference. Previously, the lower your score, you could still get shortlisted. You just have to be a bit more strategic to find the right fit. But as it's more and more competitive, I think having a very high UCAT or BMAT score, depending where you're applying, is going to become really essential. So putting the time and effort into preparing to get high scores, that's an absolute must. You probably can't do much to change your academics, so your grades that you've already achieved, but again, making sure you're on track to getting high grades and meeting your offer requirements should you get an offer. And then as far as the personal statement goes, well, the more examples and the more interesting and unique your examples are to showcase your strengths and different skill sets which are applicable to a future career in medicine, the better. But remember, personal statement is probably the least important out of these three parameters, just because so many universities don't look at them. If I had to rank them in order, I would say your UCAT and BMAT definitely is the one area where putting in the time and effort can have all the effect for a successful application.
Thank you. Really helpful, really useful. So students, if you are sitting here cramming for UCAT and BMAT, do a bit more, really focus on it, really prepare for it. Which leads on to the final question before we take question and answers from our audience. And I'll have to try and coordinate between both Facebook and Zoom. So if you do have a question, please paste it into the Q&A section. If you put it into the chat, I'll probably see it as well. For those who are joining us today, either they're a school and they're looking to increase their provision, or they're a family looking for some support, what support can the Medic Portal offer to those kind of people, and how would they find out more about potentially getting in touch with you to discuss either joining a course, perhaps bespoke individual tuition, or maybe as a high school, what kind of provision you could provide for them?
Sure, I'd say the first starting point is our website, and we've designed it to be as user-friendly and content-heavy as we can. So you will find huge amounts of free information there, from articles, blogs, you name it, covering just about every topic imaginable linked to applying to medicine. And this includes things like a UCAT and BMAT. We've written lots of guides about how to really get the most out of your study, how to set up revision schedules, and what resources are available out there as well. So definitely the first starting point is go on the website, have a look through all of that. And for these sort of pinch points that we have, the UCAT, the BMAT, the personal statement, the interviews, and this is where we can support much more on a one-to-one basis. So we have expert tutoring covering all of these elements, as well as courses. Now, given the current climate with the COVID outbreak, we are offering courses also virtually and webinar-based, so you can access these from anywhere in the world. And we have live courses as well as recorded online learning opportunities there, in conjunction with question banks. So really every resource you could possibly need, from information through to much more bespoke specialist support and training, everything is available through the website. And so have a look at that, www.themedicportal.com. Go through that and you should be able to find everything you need and easily access any of these courses and training that you want.
Fantastic, great. Thanks, Chris. I'll encourage anyone to put in their questions again into the chat or the Q&A, so we can go from there. But a question that was emailed through in advance, which I once raised you, Chris, and you said it sort of at the start of our conversation, there are only four places on UCAS to apply to medical school. Obviously, people will know that you allowed 5 choices on UCAS. What kind of suggestions would you make for a student maybe considering what we call the +1 for that 5th option, given that the statement is going to be focused on medicine? What kind of courses should students be looking at for that 5th option?
So I'm going to give you two answers here. I'm going to give you, first of all, if you are applying as a home student, you have, as you see on UCAS, 4 spaces for MDV courses. So that's medicine, dentistry, veterinary. And of course, I find it quite strange if people mix up the 4 between medicine and veterinary, but you could in theory. But that leaves you that 5th choice left, the insurance, if you will. Now, with this, you can actually put whatever you want. The universities will not see what you've applied to unless you're applying to the same university. So if you wanted to put something totally unrelated, I mean, business studies, let's say, you could do that. But if you put that in the same place you applied for medicine, of course, that might raise a couple of questions. So if you are going to deviate to do something totally different, I would choose a totally different university. But in reality, the best course of action here is to put something allied to medicine. Most people will want to do medicine ultimately. One of the other routes in is the postgraduate route. So having an appropriate undergraduate degree, say biomedical sciences, or there are a lot of other similar degrees from anatomy, physiology, etc., which if you complete that successfully, you can also then apply for the accelerated graduate entry medicine course afterwards. So I would keep your options open, go for something like biomedical sciences, and then that means that you can also apply as a graduate for the accelerated course. But I want to put one caveat in here. If you are an international student, there are a couple of universities in the UK now which are private medical schools, which sit outside of the scope of UCAS. So the University of Central Lancashire, for example, so UCLan, I believe Buckingham as well, where you can apply, but it won't count as one of your 4 choices. Now, UCLan will only take international applicants. They don't take UK EU applicants through this. So that means you could apply to 4 medical schools through UCAS, a 5th insurance choice, and then separately to say UCLan or Buckingham as well, which don't count as part of your 4. So you can increase your chances slightly by doing that if you are an international student.
Right, got it. And one other question, and we'll see whether anything does come in. If not, we'll be able to skip off early for a cup of tea. A lot of international students will have experienced healthcare provision in the system of their country and may not be particularly familiar with the particular way in which healthcare is delivered in the UK within the National Health Service. Is it important for students to be aware of those kind of discussions, given that, as we've said, this is a system controlled by the government? You're not just being trained to be a doctor, you're being trained to be a doctor in that National Health Service. Is that important? And if it is, where do students go to learn about not just being a doctor, but being a doctor in that context?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, we appreciate that you might not be based in the UK, so finding direct UK work experience will be difficult. I mean, it was difficult beforehand. Now with the virus, it's probably impossible, but we fully understand that you might not have direct UK experience. But on the other hand, you are also trying to convince your university that you're applying to that you want to go there, that you want to stay in the UK in practice, and that you understand the system. So we do still expect that you know something about what's going on, both in terms of the health stories in the UK, as well as the structure of the medical training and what happens afterwards. So it is important that you do a bit of research on this nevertheless. Now, there are some really good resources out there. Again, of course, I'll be biased. I'll point us to our website because we've got a lot of blogs about what it's like being a doctor, qualifying, being a medical student, getting through the system. And I think that's really useful. So another resource I will point you to is Brighton and Sussex Medical School. And they've created a really nice virtual work experience program on their website, which you can access totally free of charge. And it's got a whole number of different modules there. And it really goes through lots of different types of medical work in the UK, including hospital and primary care, so general practitioners. And it's a really good resource for finding out a little bit more information. We do a lot of current affairs and news articles where we debate and discuss news stories, and of course COVID, big one, but also the non-COVID news stories that are going on out there on our website. So if you sign up to our blogs, you should be able to see all of those. But by combining that information with the Brighton programme and the virtual work experience, I think that should give you a really good insight into medicine in the UK. And then hopefully you should be able to portray that to the university as well.
Great, fantastic. We had some questions just coming in, Chris, so that cup of tea will wait for a little bit. Though actually, I think you're in Berlin, so it might be a Weiss beer or something that you'd be waiting for right now. Question about Ireland and the idea of the common travel area, that Irish students will retain the same rights as the UK. My understanding, though, we're yet to have full clarity on this, and I'll be interested in your view, is that Irish students will still be accepted as home students in the new arrangements.
Yes, as far as I'm aware, the current stance as of today is still that Irish is exempt from the EU side. So, of course, Ireland is in the EU, but when it comes to home status and fee status, Irish will still come in under the same rules as UK, i.e. home students. So that is, as it stands today, still correct. So Ireland, yes, will be exempt.
Great stuff, fantastic. A question, and this is always, we get into the nuance here, if people wanted to find creative routes into this kind of stuff. Are there any medical schools where a student would enter year one of a medical degree having already done a year one of a biomedical course or a similar course at another university first?
Yes, there are the occasional medical schools that have offered this before. I think the chances of this happening anyway, the best of times was always low. And I said, if you don't apply somewhere on the basis that you think that might happen, that is an absolute bonus if you're incredibly lucky. This year, with the oversubscriptions going on, I think that's going to be extremely unlikely that it's going to happen anywhere. So I certainly would not go for that as an option at all.
Yeah, I think Sussex with a neuroscience course and Exeter with a biomedical course, there is some sort of process where if you do particularly well in that first year, you can request to have a medical interview. That doesn't mean the second half of the process doesn't happen, but it's something to consider.
And of course, there are other universities where if you attend that undergrad course, you get guaranteed an interview. I believe Cardiff run a system like this, where there are a few select courses, which if you're doing them as an undergraduate, then if you complete that successfully, you will be considered and interviewed for the medical course thereafter. So there are a few of these the smaller caveats dotted around.
I think, Chris, you would probably agree with my view on this, that if you are having to have these conversations as a student, the very fact that that is something you're having to think about is probably an indication to you as to how strong you might be in this process. And that's where looking at the allied health professions, I have a podcast on this, and there's a great resource that King's College London have on this as well, of what else can you do in medicine that's still going to make a massive contribution to people's lives, things like pharmacology and radiography and occupational therapy and bioprocessing of new medicines at UCL, which is one of my favourite degrees that the UK offers. So have a look at those. But if you're asking these questions, it's probably not going to work out for you.
Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Question about Indian curriculum. Not all universities will accept the Indian curriculum for the medicine applications. Like, this comes back to what we were saying earlier. Yes, that's likely the case, and you need to double check.
Absolutely. We've had issues with the Indian curriculum system before with various applicants. So you have to be careful. University by university will decide whether they accept it or not, and if they do, what their requirements are going to be. But not all will do, no.
Great stuff. Okay, and then the last question that's come in, for students who are wanting to study in the UK, but actually their intention is not to practice in the UK, can they use that qualification elsewhere? And I'll add a question to that. Is that something they should reveal in their application or interview?
No, I would always strongly advise against that. Certainly, if you're a home or EU student today, or home student for fees or whatever it's going to be next year, as we said earlier, medicine is loss-making, so the university gets subsidies from the government to put you through the course. And I can assure you that if you express a wish that you want to leave the UK straight away, then they will say, well, why should we subsidise? Very worrying part. Also, remember, they're looking for people who are going to be good doctors. The whole point of a medical school is to train the next generation of doctors. They're not looking for people who are going to get training and then run away straight away, whether that is saying that they want to leave medicine as a career or necessarily leave the country. So I would always strongly advise against saying this, because you're not going to show significant motivation and commitment by saying, I want to leave the country. But having said that, you have to talk about the NHS, you do have to talk about how you want to work, but of course there's no binding contract. You don't have to stay just because you said you were interested or you said you wanted to, for that matter.
Great. Okay. Because I said we're going to stick to 40 minutes and questions came and we've run a little bit over. A few more questions are coming in. I'll encourage anyone with further questions to direct them directly to you via themedicportal.com. If you are interested in more wider options, if you're interested in looking at medicine in other countries or indeed looking at the UK for some health science courses, then please direct the questions to us. It's a great pleasure to work very closely with Chris and Ricky and the team at the Medic Portal. I'm a huge admirer of the work you guys have done. As I said, you've delivered all sorts of courses and things in terms of students I've worked with in schools that I've been a counsellor at. So Chris, a massive thank you from me, and I'm sure from the audience from there. And I would encourage everybody to go to the Medic Portal. So Chris, again, big thank you.
Brilliant, absolute pleasure. And hopefully you speak again soon.
Great stuff, thank you. So for everyone else, if you are interested in the other events we've got coming up, please do go to our resources online at universityguys.com. You can hear Chris back on a sort of very similar kind of podcast interview we did, I think, about 18 months or so ago. We also talked in that to a GP, family doctor in the UK, about what their experience is like as well. And we have many other podcast topics as well. And as ever, if you'd like to get hold of me or any of my colleagues at the University Guys, please drop me an email there. So thanks to everybody for joining us today. I will flag again, if you are interested in finding about Irish universities, please go to universityguys.com/Irish Week. I look forward to seeing many of you on a future webinar. Have a very good day.